Wabarakatuh. You're with me, Mazlina Ismail. Alhamdulillah, once again in this program, Great Works of the Muslim World, every Saturday at 6 p.m. only on IKIM. And inshallah, this week, once again, we are with our guest, Muhammad Usni Muhammad Amin, who is a senior research officer at IKIM Center for Science and Environment Studies, KIAS. Assalamualaikum, Usni.
Waalaikumsalam, Mas.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, alhamdulillah. I'm here in the studio.
Yeah, all right.
Working in the office, inshallah.
Everybody is happy that they can go out now after for so long being cooped up in the home.
Yes, but we hope that they will still adhere to the SOPs and also take precautions on the COVID-19 SOP, inshallah. Yes. All right. So, inshallah, this week we will continue in our program, Great Works of the Muslim World, with our next figure or works, which is Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyyah, al-Tibb, al-Nabawi, or Medicine of the Prophet. So, would you like to begin today's topic with the author's background? Like, who was Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyyah and which period did he live in? Inshallah.
Yeah, sure. First of all, A'udzubillahi minasyaitonirrajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi washabihi ajma'in. So, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyyah is a well-known figure throughout the Muslim world, not just the one madhab that he belonged to. All the al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah knew him. His full name was Shamsuddin Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Abu Bakr, and he was inhabitant of Damascus in Syria, and he is of the school of thought of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, so that makes him al-Hanbali. And he was born in the year 1292, died in the year 1350. So in the early education, he studied under a number of scholars, including his own father, Abu Bakr ibn Ayyub, and then Ibn Abdul Daim, and then also the well-known hadith scholar Shamsuddin al-Dhahabi, or whom we know as Imam al-Dhahabi, who wrote the voluminous biographical dictionary called Siyar A'lam al-Nubala. And then he also learned under Safiuddin al-Hindi. But one of his most famous teacher was Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, and then whom he started studying under when he was at the age of 21. That was in 1313 until 1328. He started studying with Ibn Taymiyyah when Ibn Taymiyyah moved back to Damascus from Cairo. And then he stayed to study under him, and he became a close companion of Ibn Taymiyyah until the latter passed away in 1328. And Ibn Qayyim, being the close companion of Ibn Taymiyyah, they were imprisoned together from 1326 to 1328. That is till the death of Ibn Taymiyyah. At point when Ibn Taymiyyah died, Ibn Qayyim was released from prison. So according to the historian Al-Maqrizi, Ibn Qayyim was arrested for two reasons. One was the sermon that he delivered in Jerusalem, where he decried the practice of visiting holy graves. Some of the accusations were leveled towards these visitors, where they were alleged to have committed shirk by praying to the dead in the graves rather than to pray to Allah. And then the second reason he was imprisoned was his agreement with his teacher's view regarding a matter of divorce, which contradicted the view of the majority of scholars in Damascus. And it was during that time when he was in prison that he busied himself with reading the Quran and contemplating the Quran. So according to Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, another scholar, Ibn Qayyim, he used most of that time in prison, and he never wasted any time, languishing in the prison. And it was during that period of time that he gained some mystical experiences. Well, some other scholars describe it as the spiritual experience of the divine mysteries. This is, if our listeners, they have been reading about this, there are two schools of thought in Sufism. One is of sobriety, which the main proponent was Imam al-Hasan al-Basri, and the other one of ecstasy, among which the proponents was Rabi'atul Adawiyah. So these two schools of Sufi thought and Sufi practices, they talk about this spiritual tasting called Zawq. So that's a little bit of the background that I can give on Ibn Qayyim.
Thank you, Husni. Now let's go back to his work about Tibb al-Nabawi. Okay, apart from Tibb al-Nabawi first,
Yes.
Is there any other works that Ibn Qayyim produced?
Yes, Ibn Qayyim, like his teacher, he was a prolific author, and according to the scholars, he wrote about 100 books, and among them were hadith commentaries. He wrote also exegesis on Surah Al-Falaq and Surah An-Nas in the Quran, the two last surah of the Quran. And also he wrote many books on fiqh, on Islamic jurisprudence. And he also, because he had this spiritual tasting, the zawq that I mentioned, I think he wrote also a number of books on tasawwuf. One of them is the well-known Madarijus Salikin, which is an arrangement of the book by Sheikh Abu Ismail al-Ansari al-Harawi, a Sufi, a book entitled Manazil Sa'irin, the station of the seekers. Those who travel usually used to describe, Salik is a description that people use to describe Sufi practitioners, those who travel the path of tasawwuf towards God. And he also, Ibn Qayyim, also has a book on ethics called Undatus Sabirin wa Zakhirat Shakirin, which we can translate into tools of the patient and provisions of the thankful, in describing these two important Sufi ethics, patience and gratitude. And like I said, he wrote books on Islamic law, on jurisprudence. There were Ahkam Ahli Dhimmah, that is rules of the Ahli Dhimmah, stating the rights and obligations of the non-Muslims who lived in Muslim countries under the protection of Muslim rulers. And Tuhfatul Mawdud bi Ahkam al-Mawlud, a gift to the loved one regarding the rulings of the newborn. This is talking about the rights of a newborn baby. And surprisingly, because owing to his period, this is the period, 50 years after the Mongol invasion that destroyed Baghdad in 1258. So the Muslims, after the Mongol, they were facing another Turkic tribe called the Tartars, and because of that, many Muslims were also involved in the frontier war, and also within Islamic Muslim countries. Even his master Ibn Taymiyyah was famous for Fatwa Mardin, because he was himself a soldier, fighting the war against the Tatars. So we can find that Ibn Qayyim, he has two books on the arts of war. One was Furusiyah, which is on becoming a knight, and another was Kitab Uniyat Tullab fi Ma'rifati Rami al-Nushab, which is on archery, the art of archery. So these are the books that we can mention. I bring it to a short list because we don't have time to mention all
Yes.
100 titles of his works, Mas.
Yeah, but even that, it is amazing because it covers a variety of fields.
Yeah, because it is normal for scholars during that time to be, well, many of them were polymath. Ibn Taymiyyah himself was trained in philosophy, in logic, although he criticized philosophy and logic used by Muslim scholars. So even for Ibn Qayyim, which what we want to bring our focus into, he despite himself being a religious scholar, trained in ethics, trained in fiqh, trained in the Islamic law, he also has a thing or two to write about healing and medicine.
Right, mashallah. Thank you. Now, bringing our attention back on this book, Al-Tibb al-Nabawi. Okay,
Yes.
Husni, what can we learn from Ibn Qayyim's view on medicine?
So in this book, he brings a viewpoint, a Muslim viewpoint regarding medicine. He opens up the prophetic medicine by attempting to define and categorize different kinds of disease. He divides them generally into two divisions. One is that he says that diseases are either caused by disorders of the soul, and the other one is that he says that diseases caused by disorders of the body, which is not so much different than the medical paradigm that we have today. We have something called psychosomatic disease, where people who have mental illnesses, which then translates into physical ailment. So the only way to treat these people is by treating to treat their psychology as well, so that it will be manifested in their physiology. So according to Ibn Qayyim, disease of the soul involve lack of belief, doubt, and also inability to find the guidance of God. And for the diseases, Ibn Qayyim advises that one should follow the commandments of the religion, which were directly revealed by God as the ultimate method for attaining comfort and eternal bliss. And he says in the book that there is no way to attain the health of the soul but by following these commandments of the religion. So when he talks about diseases of the body, then we can see that he envisioned the body as a holistic system, a wholesome system, and diseases arise when there are deviations from the state of normality. You have to remember that before him, Greek medicine, they come up with the theory whose proponent was Galen. They propose a theory of humors. The human body is governed by four main humors: liquid, fluid inside the body, and whenever the balance of these humors is disrupted, then out of this imbalance, then disease will emerge. So according to Ibn Qayyim, such deviations are part of the nature of the human body, because all humans are animals by nature. They have flawed nature. They are prone to corruption. At least that's how the Greek before him saw the entire universe, and all that's they have corruption and generation. It's a cycle. So according further to Ibn Qayyim, these diseases are of two different kinds. One which God inspired animals to treat with no external intervention. He says, such as hunger. So when you are hungry, that is, according to him, that is a disease. So how do you treat it? You treat it by eating, and this is known instinctively by animals, even by people. And the other one is thirst. So thirst, being thirsty, is also a disease treatable by drinking water. And another kind of disease which Ibn Qayyim mentions is the second one that requires careful consideration and handling by physician. So he compares the prophetic tradition with regards to medicine and healing oneself with Greek medical tradition. It is not healing oneself or using medicine. It's not just about eating certain medicinal compound. He devotes a section, talking about guarding oneself by eating only moderate amount that is according to the sunnah of the Prophet. Today we say about prophetic food or prophetic medicine, or in Malay we know makan sunnah, take honey,
Right.
take sakanja, habatus sauda, and what have you. But people tend to forget that what is more important, according to Ibn Qayyim, based on the Sunnah of the Prophet, is to moderate the amounts of food that you take daily, and according to time. And he says that he was not part of the Prophet's guided traditions or the traditions of the Prophet's companions to use compound medications, meaning for a certain illness, you use several, compound medicines to treat it. But because he said that the prophets and his companions, they use mostly simple medication, and this is the case for medicines of different nations, the Arabs, the Turks, and the people of the deserts. But instead, he says, it was the Romans and the Greeks who perfected the compound medication. This is because the food of the people of the cities is mostly compound. I mean, you have several, dishes. You have main dishes, and then you have appetizers and what have you. So because of these, the diseases that arise from overeating, from having eaten compound foods, it requires for them to treat illnesses using compound medicine. So that's what Ibn Qayyim said. Therefore, most of their diseases are compound, and they need compound medications. However, the diseases of the people of the deserts are simple, and they benefit from simple medication. They eat bread, and then maybe some hummus. Okay, so because of that, they only require simple medications.
It sounds like watching closely what you eat.
Yes.
Is more like prevention is better than cure when it comes.
In fact, that is the maxim, the prophetic that comes from the prophetic mention. Prevention is better than cure, and that is what Ibn Qayyim is bringing. On top of building upon what has been criticized of the Greek medicine of Galen. Remember that before him there were several other Muslim physicians who took from Galen medicine, criticized it heavily. People like Abu Bakr Muhammad al-Razi, who wrote the book Shukuk al-Jalinus. He raised some concerns regarding Galenic medicine, and also Ibn Sina. So Ibn Qayyim is building on top of that foundation which had been laid by his predecessors. But what he's doing here is, on top of this criticism, he's bringing the viewpoint from prophetic traditions to not to cancel, but to complement. Because with globalization during that time, when Muslims have come into contact with Greeks or Romans, with the Persians, so people, cultures, they became intermixed. So Arabs, Muslims no longer eat that simple medication, simple medicines. They no longer, because they no longer eat simple foods, but rather culture has grown. They become accustomed to having several dishes. Therefore, the knowledge of medicine. This is what even Al-Razi said, that the knowledge of medicine expands as we know more about the human body. So does the knowledge of medicine grow. And this is interesting because when he talks about this, we can bring his attention also how the Muslims treated diseases, especially when it comes to plague and contagion. And his teacher Imam Madhabi explained the hadith regarding the plague. This is hadith in Sahih, in the two Sahihain. Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari, talks about if one person is outside the plague area, then do not enter. If one is inside the plague area, then do not exit. So these he incorporates this into healing, into medicine, because this is something that was lacking in the Greek civilization, in Byzantine civilization. Remember that when the Prophet mentioned this, when this hadith was mentioned, we find history of Tabari, Tarikh Tabari, where during the conquest of Sayyidina Omar ibn Khattab, and then he was sending one of his companion, or Amir, Abu Ubaidah al-Jarrah, to conquer Byzantine territories, and they stopped by a place called Amwas, and because of that, Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas brought up these two hadiths. And if you hear a place that has a plague, then do not enter. But if you are in it, do not leave. So this introduces what the Greek tradition were lacking before. They didn't have divine or prophetic guidance regarding this. Right. In Europe, until 12th century, whenever they hear something about a plague, they ascribe it to the conditions of the bad air. So they relocate to some elsewhere where the plague is unheard of. But that unfortunately helped the spread of plagues and diseases. But in the case of Islam, this is where the metaphysical element is introduced. Plague is part of God's will. Medieval medical understanding is that plague is caused by rottenness in the air. But admitting the possibility of the explanation based on the notion of tawakkul or reliance to God, Qayyim explains that there is a medical value in the first part of the tradition because it protects people from contracting diseases through contact with contaminated air. So, in this regard, Ibn Qayyim shares in Imam al-Dhahabi's concern. So this becomes, this is what constitutes the foundation for the medical legal tradition of Islam. And you can see, the later chapter of the book where he talks about the details of legal punishment. So that this is where he puts back his religious cap, talking about legal punishment for inept physician according to religious law. So he explains that basic knowledge which the physician have, and without which he would fall under the legal definition of the ignorant physician. And because there is a known hadith that talks about whoever treats a sick person, then he becomes responsible for that person. So when he treats them while being ignorant of medicine, of treatment of people, then he would be held liable, responsible. So this becomes a basis for modern day medical legal practices, where it is concerned with epidemiology, with what we have today, the rule of lockdown, quarantine,
Yeah.
and also movement control order.
Order.
So
Yeah.
this is the gist that I can bring up. What's interesting
Mm-hmm.
point that I can bring up to our discussion today, Mas.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you, Husni. Actually, I agree on the hadith about not leaving the place when you are, in a area where you have plague, and also not entering is
Yeah,
because not only to prevent the disease, but
yeah,
it's also a social responsibility, like ethics. Like you
yeah,
care and look after each other.
yes. And not
Mm.
only that, Mas, because we know that these rules, they
Mm-hmm.
have metaphysical basis to it. They come from the practice of the prophet, which he himself was inspired by God.
Of
But
course.
compared to rules which are not grounded in any metaphysical basis, then people are free to speculate whether this is applicable. They are free to break these laws, and they will say things like, rules are meant to be broken.
Right, right. So we need to have full understanding on why certain laws are being implemented, correct?
Yes.
So now let's go to the conclusion as we, come to the end of the program in a few more minutes to go. Well, how do you think the relevance of Tibb Nabawi, this book in our time, Husni?
Yeah, so this book, like I said, it is grounded in metaphysical basis. It's based on hadith, particularly on Prophet Muhammad's sallallahu alaihi wasallam firm belief in the existence of cause and cure for every disease that is described in many hadith, and also it is also built upon the foundation that the Prophet, he exhorted people to make use of medical treatment, because Allah has not made a disease without appointing a remedy for it, with the exception of one disease, namely death. And we can find, he how Ibn Qayyim constructed his principles of his medical viewpoints is based on the prophetic practices. And I think if we open up our mind, then this book, we don't need to actually implement it in full by discarding modern medicine, but rather regard the book as is a guiding principles with which we can see or criticize modern medicine, see if there are any weaknesses, and use the knowledge that is in this book to further improve, modern medical practices. But we need, scholars who study, who come from that world, from those world, the medical world, and also the world of the great works, and use the knowledge gained
Mhm.
in order to criticize, to analyze, to improve further. Because that is how science, advance. There's a book by a philosopher of science, Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolution. He says that the science survives by, paradigms, and these paradigms change all the time as science advances, as human knowledge, expands. The science must also change the paradigm. Even you imagine more than 200 years ago,
Yeah.
people don't know about oxygen. They know something called phlogiston in the air, and they know that this phlogiston is the one that is burned to cause fire. But today, after the standard model, after the molecule, the discovery of molecule and atoms, now we know that we need oxygen to breathe.
Yeah.
So there are lots of other, hadith that can be extracted from this book, which we can look into their scientific and medical as well as medicinal value. So we can see that there is a grounding philosophy of during the time of Ibn Qayyim. It was a loosely defined field of medicine, but it also encourages early Muslims to engage in medical research and seek cures for diseases known to them. So with this regard, we can use the same spirit, we can use the same guiding principles to advance the medical knowledge of today. So that's how I would. So that's my conclusion, basically, Mas.
Thank you, Husni. So that's it for our topic on Ibn Qayyim's al-Jawziyyah's Al-Tibb al-Nabawi, or medicine of the Prophet. So much that we can learn from the book, inshallah. And I hope all that we have shared from your sharing today will inspire people to look out for the book and study, even further, inshallah.
Hopefully so. Yeah.
I mean, inshallah. So until then, we see you again next week, same time, every Saturday at 6 p.m. on Ikim. Assalamualaikum, Husni. Thank you once again.
Waalaikumsalam.